Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to CenterStage. Now for the first time on a Mac via the Studio display, which plugs into everything. So for everyone just joining, good morning! Good morning, Tailosive Tech. Every time we've gotten a product with CenterStage, we've made an effort to always stream with that camera. But now for the first time, it's on an external monitor instead of being lowered onto a pathetic iPad camera. Now we can finally appreciate the donation animation overlays through OBS while still having a dedicated cameraman that in this case is the A13 chip. Luckily, there was some software updates, firmware you may call it, for the Studio display as of this morning. Woke up, they appeared on the Mac Studio, but this also will update the OS of the Studio display, which is technically running iOS 15. Doesn't make any sense now, does it? But it technically got a firmware update, and I've already noticed some camera quality improvements from the beginning. Good evening, it's 9 o'clock in the evening. Hey, Chris. It's like, we are moving. You are. Is the audio display thicker than the camera bump? Wait, the audio display? Do you mean Studio display thicker than the camera bump on your 13 Pro Mac? Dude, have you seen the Studio display? It's thicker than the iMac. Yes, of course. It's much, much thicker. Quality isn't the best, but CenterStage is good. Well, keep in mind there's definitely YouTube compression that goes on whenever you go live. So some of it's out of my hand. And I definitely think quality gets preserved or prioritized when you get closer. But there will be a certain amount of compression regardless. If you're doing video calls, if you're doing FaceTime calls, you're going to be at the liberty of your bandwidth. And also it's going to be at the liberty of who you're talking to's bandwidth. If they can't load a super high resolution image, it doesn't even matter if you have the best upload speed in the world and the best camera in the world. It's still going to be compressed. Where's the cameraman? Humphrey is confused that there's got to be a cameraman of some kind. But yeah, it's seems to be tracking as well as I would have hoped. It's nice that I can sit down and move about the cabin and you guys can track with me. Works about the same as I would expect on the iPad, except, of course, whenever I did these streams previously, the iPad was stuck on the desk, and I had to live stream either through the Streamlabs app or through the YouTube app, which is terrible. That's even worse. The quality is reduced to 720p. For some reason, even though iPhones and iPads have cameras that go to 4K at 60 or whatever, on the YouTube app, they restrict all live streaming to be done at 720p, 30 frames a second, and they don't let you use any additional cameras. Like if you have an ultra-wide camera, you can't use that. If you have a telephoto camera, you can't use that. It's all default to the standard lens. Any chance it goes into un-Apple monitors in the future? I believe there's knockoff versions of it, but I have not seen anybody's third-party monitor use a CenterStage-like feature and have it work as well. It's usually kind of choppy. Yes, this is the Studio display microphone as well. So I probably don't sound great because I'm standing fairly far away from the monitor right now, and the ISP is probably doing its best to prioritize my voice and home in on that. But if I get closer and if I'm just sitting here later and just reading the chat like this, it probably sounds a bit more clear. Yes, the Studio display is an iPad on a stick. Exactly right. That's why I'm such a big fan of it. Let's see. This is the microphones on the Studio display. I believe, yeah, I've switched it in OBS. I'll make sure here. Yeah, the microphone in OBS is set to the Studio display microphone. I was actually kind of curious because the mics on the display are, just kind of near the top, which I have the height adjustable version, so this is actually pretty tall. I wish I could show you, but I can't really. If I'm sitting here, look at this. It saw some other face. It zoomed out a bunch. If I'm sitting here at my desk, you can tell the webcam's up pretty high. I can push the monitor down like this to a bit more of a eye level view if I want to. I'm just curious, personally, I might test this later, but I'm curious if like the microphone quality of the MacBook Pro, I'm not really sure where they're positioned. I'm sure the audio processing and the image signal processor of the M1 Max on my MacBook Pro and the M1 Ultra and the Mac Studio, they're probably about the same. Or the Studio Display. Sorry, Studio Display has its own image signal processor. I'm curious if the position of the MacBook Pro would be better for my audio, or if the Studio Display would be better. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I agree with Brian. This is exactly what I wanted the future iMac to look like. And we found out this morning the A13 chip in the Studio Display actually has 64 gigs of storage. So my monitor has 64 gigs of storage, even though the very... Let me just position this monitor higher. It's easier for me to read. Like, only 2 gigabytes, I think, are being used on the Studio Display. It doesn't have a complete copy of iOS 15.4. It's like it's a very scaled down version of iOS, but yeah, it's it's kind of weird that they, I guess because it's the A13 chip, they had to put a certain amount of storage on it. You sound great. I thought you were using a separate microphone. I actually haven't used a separate microphone for a long time. Most of the time I do my live streams via the MacBook Pro microphone, but frankly, I tried to switch back to my old dedicated mic, which I have off camera here, and there was a lot of white noise. I didn't think it sounded as good. How's the past few days with the Mac Studio been? So I had a very busy weekend, to be honest with you. I was gone working on non-YouTube stuff pretty much all day yesterday, and here's the other weird thing. I don't know if you guys caught that, but CenterStage seems to think my chair is a face sometimes. So if this is at, yeah, look at that. If I'm at a certain angle, it tries to include the chair. Maybe it just knows that the PewDiePie chair is so cool it has to include it, see. I wish there was a mode, currently it's not available, but I wish there was a mode where I can just turn off CenterStage and just use the entire sensor to see how ultra-wide it is. I know of a way of doing that through the Streamlabs app on the iPad, but I don't believe the Streamlabs app does that on the Mac. And even through Control Center video effects. If I go up to Control Center and turn off CenterStage, which is probably what you guys are going to suggest, I'll turn it off right now. It just stays fixed right here. We know for a fact it could go further than that. I also have portrait mode, if you care about that kind of thing. Oh no, it made OBS freak out. Jeez. Okay, portrait mode just makes OBS lag, so I'm going to leave that off. But if I turn on CenterStage again, yeah, obviously we know the viewing angle in the lens can go a lot wider than the default webcam option. But people are saying MacBook Pro microphone better than the Mac Studio microphone. It could be. It's also just the fact that I'm moving around. That probably doesn't help with audio. Let's see. I don't see the display problem. You look and seem fine. That's good. Can the Studio Display have the potential to be jailbroken? Now that's an interesting question. I'm not the expert on jailbreaks, but I would love to see someone try. Just tape Mike's iPad mini to his iMac. Fixed it. That is not the only problem with the 24-inch iMac, but yeah, that would help, I guess. Have you decided if you're going to keep the display? No, I have not. It's so basically what I was mentioning earlier is that I haven't actually gotten much use after the unboxing video. We had just kind of social stuff and family stuff happening over the weekend, and basically right after I did the unboxing and setup, I edited that tech video last week as quickly as I could and got it uploaded as quickly as I could, and then it just kind of took off, and I haven't used the Mac Studio or the Studio Display since this morning. That's when I started using it again. So in my using it as of this morning and using it briefly last Friday, I love it. I love how tall it gets. It's actually like this perfect setup of having the MacBook Pro right beneath the Studio Display, so they line up perfectly. And just being able to edit again on a 27-inch display was so refreshing. I kind of missed being able to do that, which was one advantage of the iMac Pro, but of course I didn't want to keep editing on Intel anymore, so now I have the M1 Max chip and I have a big display working together, plus I have the M1 Ultra chip, but that's not honestly showing much advantages over the M1 Max at this point. It sounds like there's still some software optimization to go, but try sitting on the couch / futon. Well, I did earlier, but my audio will probably get much worse. It will track with me quite a bit. A lot better than if it wasn't CenterStage, that's for sure. But it's amazing how down low this thing gets. This is my favorite thing to do with it. Is I'll go off camera, and it should center itself, because it's like, oh, there's nothing to look at, and then as soon as it finds you, it's just like, there he is. Tesla's in Texas. Should I buy a studio display? I'll have to admit it's kind of a specific market that you should be looking for. Sometimes it gets wide back there, and I'm like, what do you see? What is it, boy? Is there something in the background? Audio's not bad even when you're on the couch. Well, maybe I'll have to do more streaming from the couch. But yeah, I think that as far as just external display panels go, you need to ensure that you're really, really in love with the bells and whistles of this thing. CenterStage being a big one. The CenterStage camera might be super useful to some and completely pointless to others. Thank you for your support, Halami. I appreciate that. All these months. I've been a member longer. You have 6 months. The chip is powerful enough to run iPadOS for sure. We know it's powerful enough to run macOS if they wanted to. They put macOS on the Mac Mini dev kit that had the A12Z chip. So I'm sure the A13 chip could handle it if they really wanted it to. They just, obviously, it wouldn't be a super capable Mac. Do you think there will be a Studio Display Pro model with 120 hertz? 120 hertz is the only thing holding me back. Yeah, it's definitely the only thing preventing me from saying this is like a guaranteed sale. Like, I would definitely keep it because I really appreciate that on my iPhone, my iPad, and my MacBook Pro. They all have ProMotion. And if the Studio Display had ProMotion, it would be an easy, like, yes, totally. The fact that it doesn't is the only thing making me question it a little bit. And I'm not really that confident that we'll get a 120 hertz Studio Display later either, because unfortunately, part of the reason they may have not prioritized ProMotion is that the limitation is Thunderbolt, not necessarily display panels. Running a 2.7 or 3K resolution, that's what the MacBook Pro is. It's not quite 4K. It's close. Let's just say, for the sake of the example, running a 3K monitor at 120 hertz is not the same thing as running a 5K monitor at 120 hertz. That's just fundamentally a lot more data, and there's certainly some workarounds that are theoretically possible. If Apple's willing to put up with those workarounds, that's a whole nother question. A couple things they could do, for one, is support, like, you plug in 2 Thunderbolt ports to your MacBook and then 2 Thunderbolt cables to the display, and then through that extra throughput, maybe then it could handle 5K at 120 hertz, but that doesn't really sound like Apple. They'd be like, hey, you buy this monitor and then you gotta buy another $130 cable, and then it unlocks a certain resolution. Or they could be working on their own proprietary connector that's better than Thunderbolt 4. Maybe they have certain access to Thunderbolt 5, that kind of thing. And with Thunderbolt 5, you can handle one connection that does 5K at 120 hertz. The other possibility is they introduce HDMI 2.1 to the Pro Display XDR, and that can handle 5K at 120 hertz. But the problem there is that HDMI 2.1 is not on any current Mac. It's not on any MacBook Pro. It's not on the Mac Studio. Even if you bought a maxed out $8,000 Mac Studio, it's still HDMI 2.0, not 2.1. So if that's their approach, then it basically would be like the Mac Pro can do 5K at 120 hertz, but no one else can, which is definitely a bit of a bummer. It's iPad. The iPad, okay, I don't know what Nick said on the podcast, but the iPad is not 120 hertz during sidecar. I know that from personal experience. I know he's kind of hoping that there's some, like, piggyback helpful way that Apple could somehow it keeps seeing ghosts behind me. I know it keeps moving on its own. But somehow they could use the A13 chip to collaborate with the M1 chip, and they can achieve some miracle refresh rate. But that hasn't happened with Sidecar. Sidecar is still best case 60, and also the iPad is substantially lower resolution than the 5K panel. The iPad's not even 3K, let alone 5K. Yes, ironically, this is the funny part. HDMI 2.1 is on the new 4K Apple TV. Thank you, Lord Zero, for the support. I appreciate it. It is on. No, Sidecar has never been 120 hertz. I don't know who said that. I don't recall Nick saying that on the show. You might have just heard it wrong, but I couldn't. Maybe I heard it wrong. There are some tricks that Sidecar uses, but it doesn't work very well. Is the only issue. I've used Sidecar a lot. And it does have some compression tricks going on, kind of similar to the H.264 format, where it just says all of these pixels aren't changing, all of these pixels are changing, so don't refresh this part of the display. But it's never been 120 hertz. Sidecar basically came out once, and then they never updated it again. And the refresh rate is not that great. And there's been compression issues with Sidecar. I've used Sidecar many times in the past and had it bug out, had it get laggy, and I'm using the wired connection. I'm not even going over wireless. I'm plugging in directly USB-C to USB-C on both devices, and it still can't maintain a solid 60 depending on what's going on with the iPad's display. So it's good for a lot of static images like Discord, which isn't moving all that much. It's not perfect, but it's also a completely different challenge to figure out how do we get a 5K at 120 hertz refresh rate over Thunderbolt 4, which maxes out basically at around 5K at 60. I think it could do 8K at 60, but it's a stretch. It's not easy. Yeah, Sidecar's definitely not good for drawing. Mac Studio obsolete now. Well, it's still, in some regards, the fastest Mac of all time, so I wouldn't necessarily say obsolete. It's just what it's made obvious to me is that Apple doesn't see HDMI as the future of all external monitor outputting. They put HDMI on the MacBook Pros and the Mac Studio as like a backup option. They're like, oh, if you don't have a good display, like you don't have the Studio display or you don't have the Pro Display XDR, then you can use your cheap basic, Asus monitor you bought on Amazon for $100. You can plug that in via HDMI without a dongle. That's why they include HDMI 2.0, even though Apple is fully aware 2.1 exists. They've shipped HDMI 2.1 on the Apple TV, which is less than $200, but they actively chose to not ship 2.1 on their Macs, which I think are probably physically capable of handling 2.1, but they don't want to because Apple seems to believe Thunderbolt is the way to go if you're doing high-res high-end monitors like the Pro Display or the Studio Display. So when you ask, is Apple working on a 120 hertz version of the Studio Display? Is there going to be promotion later? I don't have leaks. I don't have sources. I don't know for sure. But my theory is probably not, because everything is going to be just like the Studio Display and just like the Pro Display. I have the belief they're going to prioritize everything going through a single Thunderbolt port. So you notice that both on the Pro Display and on the Studio Display, they only have a single Thunderbolt port, and they're Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt 5, as far as I'm aware, is not quite ready yet, and I'm not personally convinced that the A13 and the M1 chip can do some magical science that somehow increases the bandwidth of Thunderbolt, because that's not really exactly what Sidecar does. Sidecar still has lag issues and it has latency problems, even with a wired connection. And if you're trying to, especially because Macs are used by more professionals and there's people that are going to want to game on monitors that are 120 hertz, that kind of thing, people are going to try to utilize ProMotion on that monitor for, let's see what happens if I run a game at 120 FPS. And at that point, it doesn't matter if you're like, well, compress this part, but don't compress this part. It's like, regardless of how fast the A13 chip is and how fast the M1 Max chip is, either way, they're still communicating over Thunderbolt. There's not like an ultra wideband wavelength or something they could take advantage of. So I personally am going to make the prediction that Apple's decided 120 hertz with mini LED makes sense on things like MacBook Pros, where the display is like, soldered in, built in directly to the motherboard. It's not, your display in your MacBook is not connected via Thunderbolt. It's just connected to the whole machine. Same thing with your iPad Pro. Your iPad Pro is connected directly to the logic board. It's not going over Thunderbolt. Those can achieve 120 hertz at a decent resolution, 2.7 or 3K. But as soon as you start going to 4K, 5K, 6K at 120 hertz, then Apple's just going to say, it's not that useful. This is for pros. It's not for gamers. It's not for high refresh rate junkies like me. I'm not a gamer. I'm not looking for 120 FPS just for gaming. I just love the way it looks on my MacBook Pro, and I love the way it looks on my phone and my iPad. And right now, the technology and the throughput of our connectivity just doesn't make it easy to run resolutions at refresh rates that high. So it's a bit of a bummer. I want it to exist, but at the same time, Ross Young is saying that this display is in production now, and I don't see some magic connectivity Apple rolls out. If it's already in production now, and we're not really that close to Thunderbolt 5 being ready and that kind of thing. And again, even if they did adopt HDMI 2.1 on this monitor, it would be restricted to the Mac Pro. Only the Mac Pro would be capable of outputting that. And the Mac Pro is probably going to start at $8,000 for the cheapest option and scale up way up to, $20,000 or $30,000 for the high-end option. So I don't think it's looking very good. Yeah, like Mike said, I'm limited by the technology of my time. We are spoiled with 120 hertz, it's true. Apple has required 2 connections to a monitor before. The 30-inch cinema display required two DVI connectors called Dual-Link DVI. Yeah, back then, I don't know about now. I mean, there was also a time where you had 3 separate cables plug into the MacBook to use with the cinema display. You had the MagSafe, your USB-A, and your Thunderbolt all plug in. They don't do that anymore. Now they want everything to be through one single Thunderbolt cord. So would Apple adopt 2 Thunderbolt ports onto the back of one monitor just so that refresh rate junkies like me would be happy? That would drive the cost of the monitor up, and especially if it's going to be used by video professionals and studios. I got to admit, I love 120 hertz on my MacBook Pro, but it's not really that functional. 120 hertz on laptops and computers are mostly good for gaming, and Macs don't do gaming. Apple has not talked about gaming on the Mac in years at this point. They've introduced the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, but they don't talk about how great they are at gaming. No one brings that up. They're always just like, no, it's great for your workflow. And I think that whatever their method of achieving 120 hertz is, the probably most likely scenario, if they were going to do it, is that you could plug in Thunderbolt 4 to the new XDR display, and it just downscales the resolution to 4K, because Thunderbolt 4 can do 4K at 120 hertz. That is possible. But the problem is Apple would have to swallow their pride and kind of admit, okay, maybe 5K isn't that useful, so if someone wants to prioritize 120 hertz, then they just gotta deal with a lower resolution. Is Apple the kind of company that would allow that type of option? It's a toss-up. It's a stretch, I'll admit. It's kind of a stretch. Let's see. Well, I will say they will do 120 hertz on a Pro monitor with 2 Thunderbolt connections, but you will pay a lot more. That's the other problem. Is I'm a big fan of 120 hertz, but I'm not willing to pay anything for it. if it's gonna be substantially more money, then I don't know if it's worth it. But they never let us control the iPad Pro Magic Keyboard to type it while in Sidecar. No, they didn't. The lack of HDMI 2.1 is probably due to chip availability. Also, an Apple TV doesn't multiple Thunderbolt 4 ports like a Mac has. No, but also an Apple TV has an A12 chip, and the Mac Studio has a M1 Ultra on the inside. I think it wouldn't have been the most complicated thing in the world to just support HDMI 2.1 and say, okay, maybe you can't do 4 Pro Display XDRs at the same time if you're using HDMI 2.1 and its full bandwidth. Just a software limitation like that of some kind, but no. Looked at Studio Display at Apple Store. Unfortunately, noticed 60 hertz. I think what this all stems from is the MacBook Pros. The whole reason everyone's disappointed with 60 hertz is just because the new MacBook Pros had 120 hertz. There was no Mac before the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip came out. There was not a single Mac with ProMotion. And honestly, I remember, I followed the rumors, I followed the leaks. No one was even guessing they would get ProMotion. No one was suggesting that. Like, that didn't happen until Ross Young dropped his report, like, probably a week before the MacBook Pros came out. He was like, by the way, these displays are 120 hertz. And we were all like, oh my God, what? That blew everyone's mind. So that kind of shifted expectations a ton, because I was planning on getting the new MacBook Pros regardless. I was not expecting them to do 120. I was fully expecting just, okay, we'll get faster Apple Silicon, we'll get the M1X chip, that's what we called it back then, and it'll be a 60 hertz display. I was just happy to get 120 hertz on my phone last year. That was all I really cared about. Once the MacBook Pros got 120, now everyone's like, okay, will this monitor get 120? Will the iMac get 120? Will this get 100? You know, it just kind of shifted all our expectations, which is weird. So if Apple would have just caved on the MacBook Pros and said, yeah, we can't do it, let's just stick with 60 hertz because that's what most people are used to on the Mac, they could have easily made that argument, right? Of like, well, there's less motion going on a Mac anyway, right? Like, usually windows open and then they stay open, and the most amount of motion you get on a Mac is your mouse moving across. You notice 120 hertz, I think, a lot easier on a phone or a tablet, because at least with iOS and iPadOS, every time you switch an application, every time you jump around, there's all this motion going on. There's all this scrolling going on. With a Mac, there's a little bit of that, but it's definitely less. There's a lot more static images with macOS where windows are just kind of open, and then when you switch between applications, it just brings up the window from the top to the top. Whereas I would say iOS and iPadOS, you get a lot more motion between multitasking and between scrolling and the whole display moving, and you're holding it closer. So you could easily argue that, well, Macs aren't really used for gaming. Apple doesn't seem to want to prioritize gaming on the Mac, so why do we need 120 hertz? Let's just keep it at 60. That's fine. And if they would have done that, I feel like there would have been a lot less disappointment in the Studio display. Everyone would have just been like, oh, okay, cool. Now you can buy, the iMac panel in its own cool chassis, which I will admit, this chassis design is fantastic. Obviously, it would be nicer if the bezels were a tad thinner, but as far as external monitors go, it's really, really hard to find like an aluminum premium build that doesn't have logos on it, and it is not like overly gamer aesthetic, all complicated, and not made of cheap plastic that's gonna flex and change in the temperature. Like, it is just a solid build quality, and having one size bezel all the way around with no chin, oh, it's gorgeous. I love looking at it, frankly. Yeah, of course, iPad Pro has 120 hertz. Let's all blame the MacBook Pro. Yeah, really. Apple TV does have Type-C. That's true. With a touchscreen device, you can feel the better responsiveness. That's another good point. On a touchscreen, you're, actually interacting, and you can notice the latency between motion in your hand or a stylus a lot faster. The main argument Apple provided when they gave 120 hertz to the iPad Pros was that they resulted in like almost no latency with the Apple Pencil. If you were drawing on the iPad with 120 hertz, it was like basically drawing on paper because the latency was just gone. That was their main justification. With the iPhone, it was mostly, I feel like, just keeping up with the competition. It was like, here it is again. Here's some more ProMotion. They don't care. The monitor is going to cost a lot. We know that. Well, we know it will cost a lot, but I have to think it's going to cost less than the Pro Display because Ross Young is saying it's 27 inches. So it's not a 32-inch monitor. It's not the same size as the Pro Display XDR. So why should it cost the same amount or more if it's smaller? You could always grab a decent 60 hertz or 120 hertz plastic monitor and have a local machinist make a custom chassis for you. Yeah, I'm sure that's easy. I'm sure that's very simple and cheap. No, I'm not thinking of keeping the Mac Studio at all. At this point, I haven't dove into it yet because I want to throw some more high intensive workflows on it. But as of right now, I've done several export tests with the Mac Studio and timed how quick it is at exporting. At least when it comes to ProRes workflows, and I've heard that Final Cut Pro might not be optimized for the M1 Ultra yet. It's possible that they haven't quite gotten the software to take advantage of the M1 Ultra all the way. But as far as I can see, there is no export advantages by going with the M1 Ultra over the M1 Max for my workflow specifically. That it will probably be very different if you're throwing raw red footage at it. I don't shoot in red raw. Very few people do, honestly. I shoot all of my videos at ProRes because that's what my Blackmagic supports, and that's what Final Cut is kind of optimized for. It's an Apple-designed codec. It's fairly efficient and fairly high quality, so that's what makes sense for my workflow, and there's not really another file format that would provide that many advantages for me. So with my current filming content production style, I've edited and exported several videos on the Mac Studio now. It doesn't export any faster than my MacBook. But I don't want to say that prematurely because it's also possible Final Cut needs to be updated to take advantage of the M1 Ultra, which should have twice the number of ProRes accelerators or H.264 accelerators. So I thought that would result in a faster export, and it's possible that it does. It's just not ready yet. So I'm trying not to get too ahead of myself. I don't want to upload a video saying M1 Ultra sucks, it's not worth it. No, the Mac Studio is not BS, especially for someone who wants the power of the M1 Max but doesn't have the budget for it. I would just probably be closer to recommending the M1 Mac Studio, because before, if you wanted the M1 Max, even the binned M1 Max, you had to spend a minimum of $3,000. And I was on the cheapest 14-inch MacBook Pro. And there's a ton of people out there, especially those in studios, that don't need a laptop. They don't need a dedicated, 14-inch mini LED 120 hertz panel. I honestly think mini LED is kind of overrated. I've had it on my MacBook Pro for 6 months now, and I tried it on the iPad Pro and then went back to the 2018 iPad Pro. If you're not working in HDR workflows, if you're not consistently editing content that's HDR, it's not that big a deal. The typical nits brightness of the MacBook Pro with mini LED is still the typical nits brightness of the LCD MacBook Pro, or the 13-inch MacBook Pro. It's the same typical brightness. Yes, it can achieve more colors, but most of the content we view is not that high dynamic range. Most content on YouTube is still standard dynamic range. Twitter, picture, Instagram, whatever. If you're a dedicated photographer that specializes in Lightroom, or you're a content creator that's always uploading in HDR, then I could understand justifying it. But I don't. For someone like me, I don't edit or upload in HDR because I think it's kind of unnecessary. I don't think the differences are that noticeable. So keep in mind, I was also the guy in the past that was I'm not that into OLED in the first place. I can appreciate some of the advantages of, the deeper blacks and richer contrast ratio. I can appreciate that, but I don't find it that much of a selling point. If my iPhone, if I had to choose between an LCD 120 hertz iPhone and a OLED 60 hertz iPhone, I would take the LCD one because I appreciate the high refresh rate much more than the color range. YouTube has not replied to me about all the bots in the comments, no. And I've tried my very, very hardest, for the record. Every time I find a bot in my comments, I manually have to go through and either flag or remove every single bot's comment. And that bot that keeps commenting is blocked. I clicked on their channel and I clicked the 3 dots and the option is unblock. So they've been blocked and they can still comment on all my videos. So I don't even know what the point of blocking channels is for. But Yeah, it's quite frustrating. I've contacted them privately. I've contacted them publicly. They still don't do anything about it. So I I wish they would. I don't understand what's so complicated about design the algorithm in a way so that if one channel, first of all, if I block a channel, they should not be able to comment on my videos at all. Like, no matter the circumstance. Why is that possible still? That would fix all the problems instantly. Is if you were just like, okay, if you block someone, they can't comment. That's how it should work. And yet it doesn't. I guess they can't comment directly, but they can reply to everyone in the comments, which is just as bad. So I don't know why that's still allowed. Second of all, shouldn't you permanently delete accounts that are posting the exact same thing like 500 times within a 60-second window? If you find any channel on the platform that's commented the same thing on repeat within a minute, that's bot-like behavior. That's spam. It doesn't even matter what they're saying, even if they're whether they're promoting some scam or some WhatsApp number, whatever it is. Um, they should not be allowed. That they should just I report all of them. I report every single comment I can, and then they come back the next day. So I don't know what the point of reporting the comments is, but do you think we could see Front IO on the next Mac Mini? I don't see why not. If the Mac Studio can do it, why not the Mac Mini? It's like they've clearly opened that door now, so why not? Let's see. Luke Miani and Everyday Dad are not seeing eye to eye on Twitter with the removable storage on the Mac Studio. Well, I think it was abundant from the beginning. Apple did not intend there to be upgradable storage. Otherwise, they would have bragged about that, and probably not hidden the screws underneath the rubber seal on the bottom. But why they typically engineered the motherboard to accommodate for external SSDs, I don't know what the logic was behind that. But if they're not advertising it, they probably don't intend for you to do it. They're placebos. I don't know what the placebo does because I still get the comments at the end of the day. It's not even a placebo. It's just it's pointless. Yeah, replies are terrible. So I'm not returning my MacBook for several reasons. For one, I got the 8 terabyte MacBook Pro, whereas I got the 1 terabyte Mac Studio. So I definitely was not planning on keeping it, even if the M1 Ultra chip was much, much faster. But I was just at least hoping to see a noticeable improvement in export times on the Mac Studio. And it's possible that a software update may enable that in the future, but at least with ProRes workflows, they're the same speed. I believe Marquez found a similar outcome in his video. He said, like, here's how long it took the M1 Max, here's how long it took the M1 Ultra, they're about the same. Where you notice a difference with the M1 Ultra is things like Red Raw. So I do have a friend with a Red Komodo. I'm wondering if we can arrange some kind of meetup and we'll film a bunch of stuff at Red Raw and edit that with the Mac Studio, and we'll see if we can notice a difference. But for now, there's very little point in me keeping the... We're already planning several trips where I'm going to be working away from home for a decent amount of time. And I'm going to take my MacBook Pro. It would not be that easy to take the Mac Studio. So I need something that's mobile. That has definitely become a key feature for my workflow, is having something I can take with me. So I'm going to keep the MacBook Pro. Mac Studio is not making me budge on that, nor is the Mac Pro. M1 Max is still plenty fast for me. I know that there's a tool. I know that what's his name, Theo Joe, made this like bot removal thing. I'm a little bit hesitant to unlocking my channel my channel permissions and my channel's behavior to a third party bot. It's not that I don't trust him. I'm sure he's trying to be honest, and I'm sure he's doing everything right, but I think that this is a problem regardless of what tools other people have come up with. This should be a first party fix. I want YouTube to know it's a problem, and I'm going to keep complaining about it until YouTube fixes it, because it's literally scamming people. So that, and it's my own fans, so I consider that a fairly major flaw. What if Apple refused your Mac Studio return from the damaged box? I've never heard of that happening. I've had Apple products returned in non-Apple boxes. Like, you could return You can return an Apple product in like a basic cardboard box without any of the original packaging, and they'll still give you a refund for it. Um, you can use a different account. Well, that doesn't fix the problem. That the bots are tackling my primary channel, this channel. A different account wouldn't fix that. Yeah, this should not need a third party. I appreciate that there are people out there trying to fix the problem, but I think it's still ridiculous that we would have to rely on third party software to have access to our YouTube channels in order to um, prevent scams from going on. Did an update help improve the camera quality? From what I can tell, yes. There was an update this morning. I booted up the Mac Studio and it said there was a firmware update for the Apple Studio display. So in case you're wondering how you do that, you basically plug in the Studio display to a Mac and you check in system preferences just like you would for any Mac OS update. And in there, it will include a firmware package for the Studio display. So both the Mac Studio and the display went through an update. And after the update, I thought that the webcam didn't look as compressed when I tested it last week after unboxing it. It felt like there was a lot of compression going on. And keep in mind, there's still compression going on. Whenever you do a live broadcast, YouTube is compressing, especially when you do live stuff. There's always going to be a certain level of compression, but I was just looking at the raw video feed in OBS. I was not live streaming. I just pulled up OBS and saw the video, and I was like, it looks like there's some kind of glitchiness happen with the compression. So you don't even need the box. They don't care about the box. No, they don't. Don't worry about that. The fix should be that it's eliminated. Yeah, the bots, right? Only Hawaii likes spam. I don't get excited when you told me I want a gift. I don't do giveaways. Just to be very, very clear on that. If you ever see a channel that looks like me replying to comments that says you won something, it's not me. I'm sorry, some channels like doing that. I personally have decided I'm not going to do it because most giveaways are just an attempt to boost follower counts or subscriber counts. And I've done them in the past, and I didn't really like the audience they grabbed. It typically resulted in a bunch of people that weren't interested in your videos but just wanted free stuff showing up, and I don't want that kind of interaction. Where people are just like, I don't care what you think about this, just send me free stuff, send me a free this, send me a free that, and I didn't like that audience coming after me. So no giveaways from Tailosive Tech. Don't, if anyone claims if there's a giveaway from me, it's not real. Do people actually fall for that? Some older people I have actually run into think they won something. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, a dad of my friend, who is also my friend. We get along well, and he was like, I was watching this YouTuber, and he reached out to me and said I won something, and I was like, did he tell you to text a WhatsApp number? And he was like, yeah, and I was like, it's not real. Don't believe those. There's all these bots. So I've run into people in my personal life that, they don't know how to navigate the internet as well as younger generations do, so they're just a little bit confused. I prefer channels that don't do the giveaways. Well, that's good. I've noticed recently that my Apple Card categorizes transactions incorrectly and lists incorrect merchant names. Some of the mistakes make sense, but some are not even close. Same for you. No, I can't say I've noticed that. Sometimes it's not up to the Apple Card, though. It depends on what the merchant... If the merchant name is not accurate, it's partially due to the merchant themselves. If they set up their card reader or they set out their Apple Pay beacon in a certain way, it's very possible that they have it registered under a certain name, and that's what the credit card is showing. So it's not always on Apple. In fact, I would say most of the time it's not. Yeah, do people still give to the collection plate when it comes around? Yes, people still fall for that. Oh, God. Follow my 100 social media sites to be eligible for a giveaway. All right, well, that's what they do because that's how they justify this. Is they're like, we're going to spend a bunch of money on a giveaway, and in return, we'll get more followers and we'll get more attention. Some channels don't mind doing that. Again, if you want to do it, it's your channel. I'm all in favor of you guys running your business however you want to run your business. That's your prerogative, but that's not how I want to do it, so I'm not going to do it. It would be particularly confusing if there were channels that actually were doing giveaways and you had bots doing fake giveaways, that's even worse. So maybe I just need to upload an entire video on this channel that just is called I will never do giveaways. That's let's see. Want to get the display, but waiting to see them announce a higher end version with 120 hertz, maybe some software magic to get it work with Thunderbolt 4 with 5K. I don't know exactly what they could do. I can't visualize it. I can't visualize the software magic, mostly because regardless of what Apple Silicon optimization can do, they're still going to be connected via a cable, and it's still got to be Thunderbolt. So Thunderbolt can only handle so much data, and there's only so much there's only so much compression you can do to get 5K at 120 hertz. So I have done a rant video on the bots. I made a whole video last year called YouTube Has a Serious Bot Problem. Let's see. Looking at the webcam, compared to my MacBook Pro, I think it's about the same sensor. I mean, it's obviously much wider. That might be why there's a lot more noise and compression, is because obviously this is how big the sensor really is. Wow, thank you. It's finally gotten ultra wide. For some reason, it thinks the chair is a person. I don't know why, but this is when you're taking advantage of the full camera sensor, because there's not an actual physical lens moving around. All this feature is just an incredibly wide field of view. And then once I get closer and it tracks with me, it's cropping. It's a digital crop. It's very smooth and it looks very natural, but we're getting a smaller piece of the overall sensor whenever this happens. Not a rant necessarily, just a video about it. Yeah, I did. I'd consider it a rant. It was quite frustrating. Will you sell your iMac and keep this as an external display and also earn some cash by selling iMac? No, we tried to sell the iMac. No one wants that thing. I assure you. I've tried. No one would pay any reasonable amount for it. Like, I think the highest offer I got on the iMac Pro was like $1,000. I was like, $1,000 for that whole thing? I'd rather just keep it for that. So yeah, at this point, like, we have it all set up in the other bedroom for my wife. I mean, I'm using the keyboard and mouse right now, so it's not getting much use. But at this point, I'm gonna keep using the Studio display. I haven't come to a final conclusion on it, but I like it, but obviously kind of torn on the whole 60 hertz, 120 hertz thing. If I'm willing to compromise with that, if I am willing to compromise with it, am I comfortable paying this amount? I don't know. Looks pretty good on ultra wide mode, but digital zoom doesn't look so good. Yeah, it makes sense because you are cropping on the sensor, so you're getting less of an image. I mean, I can switch to the MacBook webcam here. So now you guys are looking at me straight off the MacBook Pro webcam, which in the OBS preview, I mean, to me, it doesn't look sharper. I don't know how it looks to you guys because YouTube's going to compress it anyway. But obviously, we're taking advantage of the full sensor here. So it's a 1080p sensor. It's not CenterStage mode right now. So I guess theoretically there should be a tad more detail with this one. But yeah, there's obviously going to be some cropping that goes on whenever you switch to CenterStage. Do you know how to connect a 30-inch cinema display with a Mac Studio? I've never used the cinema display. Well, I had a 27-inch Apple Cinema display. That's what they called it back then. But can't you just trade it in at Apple? I would guess you get more then. $1,400. So I could do the trade-in at Apple, but it wouldn't even cover the entire price of a Studio display. So it's a lot cheaper, but I'd also be trading in an entire computer with, not only a 5K panel, but also a 2 terabyte SSD, the AMD graphics card, the Intel CPU, the webcam, the speaker system, and everything. I'd be trading all that in just for a monitor. This is the Studio display microphone. Hi, Randy. By the way, I don't know if I said hi, but sign the iMac Pro and then the value should go up. No, it goes down. I've tried that. No, it's never reached the point. People joke about that. There's all kinds of people that love to suggest me sell something. But whenever I'm like, why, are you in the market? They're always like, no. Well, I don't want to buy it. But you should sell it. Someone might want it. It's like, who? They're like, I don't know. Every time I've actually tried to sell it, no one actually wants that thing. A lot of people like the idea of selling it, but that's about it. Um, if a Studio Display XDR comes out, I bet that Studio Display catches most of the value back. Most of the value? What do you mean? I mean, it's definitely got to be more expensive than the Studio Display, that's for sure. And that starts at 1600. So I'm predicting. Keep in mind, it's also rumored to be smaller. It's like 27 inches instead of 32 inches. It is rumored to be mini LED. Ross Young, I confronted him about that. I was like, how are they going to get 120 hertz when it's still Thunderbolt 4 can't handle that? And he didn't have a great answer. All Ross Young said in response was, well, every mini LED panel they've done so far is 120 hertz. I don't know why this one would be any different. I'm like, I know why, because Thunderbolt can't handle it. But also, every display they've done that's mini LED is substantially lower resolution. So, let's see. What do you mean on resale? Catches. Oh, you're saying if you resell the Studio Display, it'll catch most of its value? I wouldn't be so certain. It's not a particularly beloved product. Like, I mean, a lot of people like it, but a lot of people don't. So that gives me the impression that if you sold it as used, you would probably still lose several $100s on it. Let's see. Just don't take a lot of photos / videos. What are you talking about? How do you survive with only 64 gigs on your iPad? I don't know. I don't I don't understand how people fill it up necessarily. What is your storage filled up with on iPad? Because iPad OS isn't great at file management in the first place, and it's not like you take a ton of photos and videos like you do on your phone, because when you go on trips and stuff, that's pretty much what your phone is filling up with, is high-res videos and pictures. With the iPad, I don't really do that, so I do my video thumbnails on there. I guess I don't have a ton of games. If you have a lot of high storage games, that'll fill up 64 gigs pretty quick on the iPad. But I don't store a bunch of like movies and TV shows locally, so that probably helps not take up a bunch of space. Triforce says, what's a fair price you'd sell it for? Well, now my wife likes it, so my wife wants to keep it. So we took it off the market because it was basically, we put the iMac Pro up for sale right before I got my new MacBook Pro, which was in October. And we took it down like a couple weeks ago. So for months, it was for sale, and there were hardly any people interested. We had it listed for like, I think 2,200 or something like that. Yeah, if you do video editing on your iPad, of course, that's going to take up a lot of space, but I don't. So that's why I can get by with 64 gigs. But yeah, I only got 1 or 2 offers, and none of them were better than Apple trade-in value, and I didn't think Apple's trade-in value was very good either. So, does the display work with PS5 / Xbox Series X using adapters? I don't have either of those, so I can't tell you. I would guess yeah, probably, if you have proper adapters, but it's likely not going to run at the full 5K. Apple has some proprietary drivers or something like that to get it at the full resolution. It would probably run at like 4K or 1440p or something like that. Would not recommend it. It's better off you're plugging into a TV or gaming such. You don't want to buy a 5K external monitor for your console, because none of the games on your console are going to run at 5K anyway. So could they make the higher end display Ross Young is talking about with 120 hertz with the connection needed to support 120 hertz for future Macs? They could, but that means every Mac as of today could not run it. If they do that, it will probably be Mac Pro exclusive. I put my entire photo library on my iPad, 35 gigs. I got the 1 terabyte option. Oh no. Jeez. Bet you feel good now. My 8 terabyte is not terribly full, but that's the point of it. Let me check. I'll look right now. Oh, okay. I'm at 5.41 terabytes available, which means I've used over a terabyte, right? Over 2 terabytes. I've used like 2.6 terabytes so far. And over time, I will just create a larger and larger digital footprint. It's just a matter of time. So I got 8 terabytes because I wanted the MacBook Pro to last me for years and years and years. This was a long-term purchase. The MacBook Pro for me was not a stopgap. It wasn't like, oh, let me buy this and use it for for a year, and then I'll switch out to the Mac Studio. That was not my plan at all. I wanted a very powerful mobile workstation, and that's what it is. If anyone really wants to take advantage of any unused storage, download Apple Music lossless. I guess that'll take up a bunch, but how often will that get used since most people are probably listening with AirPods? I don't know if this is possible, but since Apple has their own drivers, could they make it use 2 Thunderbolt ports to do 6K 120 hertz? It's theoretically possible, but I'm not going to say it's likely. It would also require you to buy an additional cable. So if you're using it with your MacBook Pro, you'd have to occupy 2 ports just for your monitor, only leaving 1 Thunderbolt port left. And the other issue I have with that is they would have to include additional I/O on the monitor itself to support 2 Thunderbolt ports. Most, the Pro Display XDR is $6,000 and only has 1 Thunderbolt port. Adding another one on there, oof. Yeah, NAS, if you have tons of storage, is a decent option. Especially if you don't mind it all being in one place. I'm not saying it's impossible for the new display to have 120 hertz. I'm just saying it will likely not be cheap. I don't expect it to be close to the same price of the Studio display. Whatever this thing is, 60 hertz mini LED, even that, it will probably be a $3,000 monitor or more. Even with their own drivers, you're limited by the physical limitations of the Thunderbolt cable, so now that still wouldn't work. Well, right, he was suggesting 2 Thunderbolt cables, which I believe would work theoretically, but that would require additional hardware on the monitor itself, which will drive the price up. So, all of this to say, like, the number of people on Mac that actually will use 120 hertz for something functional is very low. This is mostly a nitpick thing for refresh rate junkies. That's my definition, in case you're wondering why I keep saying that. Refresh rate junkies are people that like notice and appreciate 120 hertz for like non-functional reasons. It's like an aesthetic choice. Gamers can argue that 120 hertz is a functional thing because they can literally get a quicker response time. That's been tested. Like, gamers can notice a player or an opponent appearing faster if the display refresh rate is higher. That's not what we're doing on our Mac. We're mostly just, moving windows around and scrolling and that kind of thing. All of that is an aesthetic choice. It's not really like functional. Oh, I can't use it if it doesn't support 120 hertz, or 120 hertz gives me some kind of advantage in my workflow. It rarely does for any Mac use case. I think it's more likely that they did it on the MacBook Pros because they could, because they weren't limited by the throughput of Thunderbolt, and the display is soldered into the logic board, so no issue. But with external monitors, you have to go through a Thunderbolt port of some kind. Not the price of a Studio display, sure, but what about the price of a Mac Studio? I'm more inclined for a display to pair nicely with my 16-inch MacBook Pro 2. What about the price? I'm not sure I understand your question, but I thought the price of the Mac Studio was decent. Yeah, James is like, my idea of gaming is solitaire. I can only play solitaire at 120 hertz. That's how it works. But yeah, just go on Amazon. If you don't care about the chassis, someone was asking if the Studio display is worth it. Should they buy one? It makes a lot of sense if you're interested in the bells and whistles. So for me, the best bells and whistles of this monitor are CenterStage, which I'm a huge fan of, and I've always wanted it on my Mac, and now I technically can have it. Secondly, I love the spatial audio equipped speakers. There's sound that comes out of the bottom and the top. I'm no audiophile or anything, but I've listened to lots of music and I've watched lots of videos on it, and the sound quality is really impressive. They're not as front-firing as the iMac Pro speakers are, so I wouldn't necessarily say it's like the best speakers in any Mac setup I've ever heard, but they are very, very good. If not, they're very close. With the audio I was playing back on the Studio display, it felt like it was hitting lower frequencies than the iMac Pro. but the iMac Pro was a bit more directed at you. So the highs sounded a bit more clear. Um, I don't believe they have any speakers on the studio display pointing towards you. Whereas the iMac Pro in teardowns, you can see there's actual speakers coming at you. Even though they're behind the display, they still come out pretty clearly. Um, so I would say it's close to on par with the iMac Pro in terms of sound quality. And I also really, really appreciate having the Thunderbolt connection, which is what I'm using with my MacBook Pro right now. I'm charging my MacBook Pro. Well, not charging it. I'm powering it through the. It's at 80%. Optimized battery charging is turned on. So I can plug in additional accessories to the back with 3 USB-C ports, so I can plug in all my additional hardware back there. Like I'm charging my iPad. I can charge my AirPods with MagSafe all through the additional USB-C ports. So I can even plug in an adapter and have Ethernet go into the studio display, and then I get an Ethernet connection to my MacBook Pro through this one cable. So just having one cable that does everything is really nice and cleans up my setup a ton. And I like the height adjustability, actually. I didn't think that would be a big deal, but now that I've been using it, the fact that I can lower the monitor when I'm filming something and the desk is in my background, and then I can raise it. I've been using it at its like maximum height, and I haven't been able to use a Mac like this before, and it's really nice. I actually like having the viewing distance like this. At this angle is really comfortable. So if you're not interested in any of those bells and whistles, and you're just like, no, I just want an external monitor of some kind, there is so many cheaper options, especially if you're just comfortable with 4K. There's some really decent Amazon panels that you could get for a fraction of the price that will be nowhere near as expensive as the studio display is. I have not decided if I'm keeping it or not. Everyone keeps asking that. No, I haven't decided. Probably not at this point. I don't know if I can justify the cost. I'm gonna keep using it. I want to see if it could be one of those things that I feel like I utilize enough that I can justify keeping for a long time. You could put SSDs on the back of the monitor too. Well, probably not as easily, but what is the best monitor for Mac OS? Well, Mac OS doesn't really change that much depending on the monitor you use. It's just those bells and whistles of the spatial audio, the CenterStage, the height adjustability, the USB-C hub on the back, having one cable plug into your laptop that can do everything. Those are the kinds of things you should be buying. You should be buying the studio display for. Don't buy it as just like I want an external monitor of some kind. If you're not bothered by if you're not bothered by your monitor having a chin or a logo on the front, that bothers me personally. I don't want to use an external monitor that has a chin or a logo and asymmetrical bezels or a plastic back. I've used monitors like that before, and they just feel so cheap, and they crackle, and they just don't really give a premium feel to them. That bugs me, but if it doesn't bug you, there's so many cheaper options out there. Um, let's see. Not liking the studio display. It's becoming very convincing. Mike, you can always buy my iMac Pro. Yes, this is T-Mobile home internet. Starlink is gone. Comcast is gone. Everything as of now is through T-Mobile. Is CenterStage overrated? I feel like it's weird to always have the camera moving around when I want it to stay still. Well, that's why, luckily, it's an option. If I want to, I can do this. Ta-da! Now I gotta adjust the camera manually, but if you don't want it to move around, it doesn't have to move around. So I just turned it off. All right. I turned it back on because CenterStage is awesome, and it's not overrated. It's very useful, especially when multiple people are on the call. Thank you for the super chat, Ben. That's very kind of you. He says, over or under 10% CenterStage comes to a non-Apple monitor within 5 years. I don't know exactly what you mean by that, because there are webcams that are ultra wide and will motion track with you. They don't work usually as well as CenterStage does, but is your question like that Apple would support the CenterStage feature on a third-party monitor? I'm gonna guess under 10%. I don't think that many third-party monitors would prioritize that, and I don't even know if necessarily like Apple shipped a whole A13 chip inside the studio display just for the image signal processor. They just did that for the camera and the microphone, maybe some of the speaker work, but for the most part, just the camera. And I don't see, I say it's like 0% chance third party monitors are going to start getting the A13 chip equipped. Um, so yeah, I would say under 10% chance of that happening. You like the Magic Trackpad? I'm loving it so far. Well, I use the trackpad with my MacBook Pro, which is fine, but I did not buy a dedicated trackpad. I've used them in the past, and I just don't find them as useful as the Magic Mouse. I prefer the mouse. When are you dropping the review of T-Mobile's internet? Well, people keep asking about it. Maybe I should do it today. I'll probably work on that after this. Would Apple allow other monitors to use it? Well, so far, Apple seems to only allow CenterStage on devices that have Apple Silicon inside them, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. Have you seen that iPadOS 16 may have the option to revert back to iPadOS 14 layout with the widgets pinned on the left? Okay. I don't really consider that a massive upgrade. As, I mean, that's the way it should have been, but yeah, I don't see it. Like, oh, great! I'm gonna go buy a new iPad now. It's like, oh, sorry, we broke it last year. We fixed it now. Okay, cool. Honestly, since I've been using the studio display now, and I have my MacBook Pro directly beneath it, this is like my power setup. I love it. I have one cable plugged into my MacBook Pro, and I'm getting power through that. I'm getting data through that, and I'm charging things through the studio display and everything. I have this gorgeous 16-inch mini LED 120 hertz panel that I can put Discord and Twitter and, I can do whatever I want to on this display. And then I'm editing and live streaming on the studio display. And I'm, switching the mouse in between the two, and it's really, really easy. Ever since doing that, my iPad has become so useless. It's just sitting there doing nothing. The only thing I use my iPad for is video thumbnails. And once I'm done with the video thumbnails, it just shuts off. And I'm like, the only thing before I had the studio display, I would do my live streaming and my video editing on the MacBook Pro, and then my iPad was usually split screen Discord, Twitter, sometimes Discord email or Discord and messages. So it was like my media consumption device by default, and then occasionally I would do a video thumbnail on it. Now I'm putting all of my media consumption stuff on the MacBook display, and I'm doing all of my work stuff on the big display, which, by the way, it's so much easier to read the chat and to view the OBS window at the same time with this amount of display size, which I'm realizing I kind of missed on my iMac Pro. And I've never had a height adjustable external monitor before. And I've also never seen an external monitor that can be sit up this high. It goes very tall, by the way. It's kind of taller than I thought it would be. But just at this height, it's so much more natural for my eyes. And I like that I can fit the MacBook Pro directly beneath it. Does Discord and Twitter have all that promotion on the MacBook? I think so. I thought they updated it, but as far as I can tell, it looks 120, yeah. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty good at detecting 120 hertz, and it looks 120 to me. Let me throw it on the. Oh yeah, that's definitely 60. I threw it on the display, and then I put it back on the MacBook. Yeah, that's 120. Yeah, I can tell. It's there. I do love it, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to justify the cost, especially because, yeah, the setup right now is very nice, but I'm also going to be taking trips that are a month long, sometimes more. I haven't decided. I'm not going to decide in this live stream, despite all the questions. It's worth more to just keep the iMac. Well, my wife wants to use it, so she could use the iMac Pro and I could use the MacBook Pro. Whereas if we sell the iMac Pro to cover the studio display, then only I can use it. Some of us use large monitors because we have bad eyesight. Yeah, my eyesight's probably not getting any better, that's for sure. I like aspects of it, but it's very expensive. For one, I got the height adjustable studio display, which was $2,000. And that's a lot of money for some breathing room in my software. And I don't know how often necessarily I'm going to use the CenterStage. I've been doing a lot more of my more recent live streams just with my Blackmagic camera. What do you guys prefer of this? Let's do some polls here to wrap up the stream. We'll switch to the MacBook Pro webcam here. So this gives you concept of what looks. Let me ask what looks better. See, my eyes usually don't go up like this because I'm always working hunched over. CenterStage, MacBook, webcam, and then what I used before this was the Cam Link. So that's the Blackmagic camera that I shoot my videos with. It doesn't need to be in all caps. That's okay. And then I'll do another poll later after I see some of these results just to gauge audio. I think I can switch the audio midstream. I'm not sure. Let's see. I would go up to 2500 for a monitor, but it has to be more like mini LED plus 32 inches. I don't think that's going to happen. Ross Young is currently saying it's a 27-inch panel. So, yeah. Did you know if you hold Option and press certain function keys, it opens System Preferences pages? I haven't heard that, but that makes sense. I know there's like a billion little Mac features that they bake into Mac OS, which I love. Oh, okay. Most people aren't voting MacBook webcam. Interesting. A lot of people voting CenterStage. Let me jump back to that. We're on CenterStage again. Of course, the bitrate, the quality of the image might shift a little bit, but the flexibility of being able to walk around is definitely nicer. Especially if I'm reacting to an event, I can be like, what? Oh my god. It's also going to be very useful when I do the channel member streams. So for those who don't know, channel members are the guys with green names in the chat. They pay $2 a month and they watch behind the scenes live streams I do. So when I'm filming and editing my tech videos, I'm not sitting in the chair the whole time. I'm like getting the lights ready and I'm setting up the cameras over here. So if I can be doing all this and the camera's tracking with me, I think it feels a lot more, I don't know, cool, immersive, or because right now I'm doing it all off of the MacBook webcam, and when I do that, I walk off frame all the time and you don't really get a good visual on me. CenterStage is in the lead. Blackmagic is in second place. Why not get the one with the VESA stand? Because I move my desk around a lot, and I'm against a window right now. So I'm not going to easily be able to put in a VESA mount. I don't know if I trust the structural integrity of the wall behind me anyway. MacBook Pro is last. Interesting. I like CenterStage better because of the framing when you are sitting. Okay, that's fair. CenterStage is creepy. I think Blackmagic looks the best, but seems like it would be annoying to set up every time you stream. The low angle of the MacBook Pro is a little weird to me. Works fine for editing streams, though. No, I definitely agree that the viewing angle of the MacBook Pro webcam is not ideal. I've thought about maybe getting a MacBook stand, but I just don't really like the look of that either, because now you have this keyboard that's way high up. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be typing like this. That's going to be awkward. Or like, I don't really want to type like this. I've used laptop stands in the past. So, okay. The poll is not actually what I thought, especially, maybe my brain flocks to the negative, but see, it keeps wanting to include the chair. Let me fold it down. Can you do this? So it doesn't track with that. But my brain maybe flocks to the negative because most people definitely, what's it called? Not most, but several people when I started the stream were just like, it doesn't look that great. I'm not that impressed. But on the poll, at least, there's more people voting for the CenterStage than the Blackmagic, which is kind of not what I thought. Obviously, the Blackmagic is a dedicated camera, which looks pretty nice. But I'm not trying to gauge for convenience. Don't worry about what's convenient for me. I appreciate the thought, Marngel, but vote based on what you just think looks overall better, or essentially as we do more live streaming in the future, yes, we'll do lots. I'm not quitting anytime soon. Live streaming, if anything, would become like the only kind of content production I do in the future. If I did some kind of retirement, I would probably just become a dedicated live streamer. What? Why are you panning down? What? This is my new live stream setup, guys. I'm just gonna read the chat from down here. Welcome to Tailosive Tech, live on YouTube. I don't know if I've ever live streamed laying down before. This is weird. I could get used to this. So don't worry about convenience. Just think about what looks the best. The chair is a person. You lost a good deal of weight looking good. Thank you, Joel. I'm glad someone noticed. Okay. Most people, I still get comments the other day. They were like, why don't you join a gym? And I was like, I'm losing weight without a gym. But we might join a gym someday. I don't know. CenterStage is fun because it automatically frames you, but the image is subpar compared to MacBook. I think it's fundamentally subpar simply because it's a digital crop. Like, there's no way around that. It's not, the camera's not physically moving around. It's just a wide field of view, digitally focusing on where I am, which is cool. But the MacBook has that same 1080p sensor. You know what's confusing is that this is supposed to be a 12 megapixel ultra wide. 12 megapixels, like, technically over 4K. But in none of the OBS settings or anything, or any of the advertisements, does Apple claim this is a 4K webcam. They just say 12 megapixel, which I'm not really sure how they get away with. Maybe the image signal processor kind of dumbs it down to 1080p. You could live stream in your sleep. There you go. Now we're talking. Let's see. Two monitors center and the other side and use a Mac Bluetooth keyboard. You should sit on a big beanbag chair. I don't have one of those, but could I sit on the studio display box? No, that's how I break it. Oh my god, guys, have you seen this? Let me show it up close. So this is the Mac Studio box that UPS completely demolished. Look at that. This thing took a big drop. I seriously wonder if my Mac Studio is okay. Does anyone else have a Mac Studio in the chat? Because I was curious. Like, it's not the loudest thing in the world, but I know it's like the loudest thing in this room. It's definitely louder than my MacBook Pro, and I'm not even doing anything with it. Like, I hear the fans on just during idle use. Like, I'm just doing basic stuff like web browsing and, texting, and I'm not doing anything. I'm not exporting or anything. But, like, I can hear the fans on my Mac Studio quite audibly. Like, I'm curious if anyone else out there got a Mac Studio and notices that the fans are not... I'm not saying it's like crazy loud. It's not like Intel loud. Like, my iMac Pro got way louder than the Mac Studio does. It's not like, but it's just like the idle sound is pretty loud. Okay, Simon says I've heard others say it's louder. That makes me feel good. I have a Mac Studio. We are running 40 VMs on it, and it already paid for itself. Well, that's good. I feel like you could use the Blackmagic for the image quality mostly, and then CenterStage when we watch the events or BTS streams if you keep it or change it up. I think for behind-the-scenes streams, CenterStage would definitely be the best. That's for sure. No, we've talked about that Variety Entertainment. Apple will accept a return even if you don't have the original package. I've done that myself. I've just walked into the store with an iPhone and been like, hey, can I return this? And they'll just take it. They don't need the original package. Okay, Quinn from Snazzy Labs also tweeted about the fans being quite audible when idle. Yeah, they're not like ultra loud. It's not like distractingly loud, but it's just like you're used to Apple kind of caring about those kinds of things. You're used to Apple kind of being the company that's like, hey, we emphasized how quiet we can make this machine. And the fact that I can kind of hear it is like, this is a bit not up to your standards, Apple. Maybe it's an M1 Ultra thing, because I'm like, hey, the M1 Max is the exact same chip in my MacBook Pro, and I don't hear it. It's fans kicking on like that. You should return and get a new one just because of how that box looks like after delivered to you. Well, I'm gonna return it regardless, so it doesn't even matter what the box looks like, honestly. But I've heard Intel machines basically sounding like a mini jet. You'd think they were about to take flight. Yeah, just like the PlayStation 4s. All the PS4s, if you boot them up, they're just ready for takeoff. Does your CenterStage not zoom? iPad CenterStage seems to zoom and crop. You know what I mean? It is. This is zoomed. This is the zoom view. Let's see if it still motion tracks with the chair. This is what happens when you're not zoomed. No, that's a person. Focus, cameraman. Hey, look at the chair. It's a person. Now when I want... There you go. Why does it think it's a person? I don't get it. Only when I don't want it to be. Yeah. No, it definitely zooms. I can't... I don't have an iPad with CenterStage with me, so I can't directly compare it, but I was doing things earlier where it kind of came in my direction, but it does. The chip may idle warm. That could be why. Why would it do that? And not on the MacBook Pro, though. I don't have a 13-inch MacBook Pro. No, I got rid of that years ago. I think Scott, if Scott is in the chat, I think Scott ended up with it somehow. Someone bought it from me and someone bought it from them, and then Scott has it. How do you get something from Apple just to enjoy it and then return it? Well, it's easy. If you buy something and find out that it's not exactly up to your standards, or you find out that UPS dropped it, or just like me, you find out the M1 Ultra chip is not actually that much faster than the M1 Max when it comes to ProRes editing workflows, then you're like, well, I'm not happy with this. And Apple has a no questions asked 14-day return policy, which they're allowed to turn off at any time. I hope you guys are aware of that. They might go into... No, I don't think Apple has a previously owned section, but they do have a certified refurbished, and I think they take returned items and they use them for parts or that kind of thing. I don't know exactly what happens to them, but they're just fine. Have you listened to any of Apple's recent earnings reports? They're not hurting for cash. If at any given moment they wanted to turn off the return policy on my account, they could. Like, there's nothing stopping them from doing that, and they've chosen not to. Once I cleaned the dust out of my PS4, it was insanely quiet. Oh, that's good. They refund you in full. Yes. 14 days. Sometimes there's a recycle fee, but yeah, for the most part, they refund you in full. What happens to returned Apple products? I don't know exactly, but I think Apple is willing to take the loss on the return window if the alternative meant that less people would buy the product. Like, if all sales were final, they would probably see less sales. So they just openly agree to have a return window. The Final Cut Pro version used for testing, I believe, is not yet released. That's also what I've heard. Which makes it kind of difficult to review until that version is released, because we don't really know how much faster the export is going to be. Don't feel bad for returning Apple products. Apple is the most valuable company in the world. They make more money than anybody. They have hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. You deciding that you don't like an Apple product, so you're going to return it, is not going to cause them any issues. Don't worry about that. Zolotech just mentioned on Twitter that the Studio display seems to have a fan. Maybe this is the one you're hearing and not the Mac Studio. No, because the Mac Studio is off right now. I turned it off for this live stream because I was worried that the sound would be a bit too much, and now I don't hear the sound anymore. Let me be quiet and listen for a second. I can just barely, very quietly hear the MacBook Pro because I'm streaming off of my MacBook Pro right now. I can just barely hear my MacBook Pro fans, but I don't hear any fan in the Studio display. Let me try hear this side. Wow, there's a fan in this thing? Enjoy my ear, everybody. No, if there's a fan in that thing, it is dead silent. Yeah, certified refurbished is still sold at a profit for Apple. So Don't worry about that. They would rather you return it, to be honest. Yeah, basically all kinds of major companies that have secure profit margins have return policies. So please don't worry about someone returning a product, how that hurts Apple. They'll be fine. They have lots of money. They'll be okay. Um, what $200, $500 DSLR camera would you recommend shooting basic short films, YouTube videos, podcasts, switching from iPhone and GoPro? I don't know of a ton of like. Honestly, I haven't been in the market for a while, at least in that budget specifically. I don't know if there is a DSLR camera that's under $500 that would be better than your iPhone at this point. I don't think you need one yet. If your budget is $500, then you probably don't need a DSLR. Did you do a sound check with those speakers in the studio display? Oh yeah, I was listening to music this morning. I've been watching YouTube videos. I've edited several videos with the speakers. I think they sound fantastic. I mean, it's probably sounds a lot better just because I've just used the MacBook Pro speakers for the past several months, and the fact that I'm now using something better than laptop speakers is a bit noticeable. Someone said there's actually two fans inside this thing. Said he noticed that because there was a breeze coming from the top. Do I notice a breeze? Barely. I can't tell if that's a breeze or. Well, there's definitely ventilation when you're playing music out of it. When it's playing sound, you can feel the. No, I can't hear one right now. I don't know what you have to do. It's like, let me fire up the display settings. It's like, what? Is that normal? They showed the fans for the display at the event. Oh, I must have missed it. I mean, it doesn't shock me. A lot of monitors have fans in them, but do you recommend the new Magic Keyboard, mouse, and trackpad? I mean, they're very expensive, but they are Apple. I mean, they come with a braided USB-C to Lightning cable that's black, which you can't buy separately, which is kind of cool. It's good if you like, your clean ecosystem to all be like neutral and to not have any clunky brands or logos on them. That's unfortunately what all alternative keyboard and mice are. They're like, oh, let me put my logo here, here, and here, and it's got to be all plastic. And it's like, if you're kind of a Apple sheep keyboard schnob, yeah, I agree. I got this with my iMac Pro. And aside from the fact that it charges via Lightning, it's very nice. I think it looks good. It's worked reliably. It's very clean looking. I like things that are built premium, like it's all metal and aluminum, and it doesn't feel cheap. The only issue is it charges via Lightning, which kind of annoys me. But all the third-party keyboard and mice I've tried have not felt as rigid, and they definitely don't look as good. So don't act like there's no alternative. If that kind of thing isn't important to you, then you can find some Amazon Basics keyboard for like $20 or something super cheap. If you're on a budget, don't worry about it. The only reason why that display is thicker than the iMac 24-inch is because of the fans inside the monitor. Jiffer, I think it's more specifically the heatsink. The 24-inch not heatsink. The power supply. The 24-inch iMac has an external power supply. That's why, even though it's a desktop, it has this giant brick that you have to plug in one cable, and then there's a brick on the floor, and then another cable comes out of that brick, which I think is pretty stupid. But the studio display does not have that. The power supply is built in, which I think is mostly why it's thicker. Would you ever try the Beats Fit Pro compared to AirPods Pro, or just wait for the next generation of AirPods Pro? I'm waiting for the next gen of AirPods Pro. We've had Randy from the podcast review several different Beats in the past. The only reason I'm not terribly interested in them is everyone who's reviewed the Beats has said that they don't have as good transparency mode. And that's a very important feature to me. I don't want like a half-baked, ambient noise or half-baked transparency mode. Try the MX Keys keyboard. No thanks, because I'm happy with the keyboard I have. If anything, I will just get a Magic Mouse to use with my MacBook Pro, and then the keyboard on top of my MacBook I'm going to use with the display. If by some miracle I end up keeping this thing, I would just use the keyboard on my MacBook. I wouldn't need a separate one.
Um, Yuhirasawa says, I think it's worth it if you plan on keeping it for 10 years. Yeah, that's a good question. 10 years. Does the studio display cable disconnect from the back of the display, or is it built in? It does disconnect, but it's not meant to be disconnectable by the user, by customers. It's stuck in there by default, and it's very, very hard to pull out. But I've read that there's like a specified tool that Apple has made just for Apple employees to unplug the cable if you really, really need to. But it's kind of like the HomePod. If anyone remembers the original HomePod, you could unplug it, but it was very, very hard. So it's like, yeah, you can, but don't do it often, which I think is fine. Most people's external monitors are going to go out of the box onto a desk and then stay on the desk for years and years and years. So is it super important that the cable be removable? Not, not terribly. I guess it would be kind of nice if you could, but I've actually run into more issues with iMacs having it so easy to disconnect. I've had many iMacs in the past where the power connection on the back is so weak that people will just adjust the tilt. They'll just move the iMac a little bit and it'll unplug the power, and then it turns off. So you got to reach back there and plug it in again. So Linus ripped the cable out of his studio monitor, took both hands. So yeah, that's what I've heard as well. It can be done. It's just not recommended. Don't do it. Try to avoid doing it if at all possible. It could have made the iMac thinner. Ugh. Why do we care so much about desktop thinness? That's what I still don't grasp about the 24-inch iMac. It's like bragging about how thin your Apple TV is. It's like saying the third generation Apple TV is better than the fourth gen because it's narrower. Like, who cares? It's going to sit there. It's just going to plug in and sit there and not do anything. Same with the iMac. You take it out of a box and then you set it on a desk and then it sits there. Who cares how thin it is? Why design a cable that can be removed, not removable when they have MagSafe? Well, it's probably the amount of power draw has something to do with it, but um, I don't know. I don't know what the decision with that is. There's probably some cost saving measures involved potentially, but I would love to hear Apple answer that. The little magnet connection they applied on the 24-inch iMac, it's probably over engineered. It's like, we want to make it really easy for you to plug in this power cable that you'll plug in once and then never have to worry about again. If the cable breaks, you lose the whole monster by making it an e-waste concern. Yeah, I'm sure. Landfills are just filled with Pro Display XDRs, right? Um, no, I think the cable is removable. If you damage the cable, which I don't know why or how. I mean, it's a braided cable. So you'd have to do something pretty weird and pretty random to your studio display cable, um, in order to in order to reach the point of it being like unusable. But you would probably just contact Apple and then they would ship you a new cable, and or they would, you take it to a store and the employees would disconnect it and then plug in a new one. Um, YouTubers understand. I don't think YouTubers understand. No one cares about removable cables or upgradable storage. Literally, no one. I don't think it's no one, but I do think it's a very, very small percentage. It's probably higher for general. It's probably more likely for people who buy desktop computers, because I would argue most everyday consumers don't need the Mac Studio. Most everyday consumers aren't going to buy the Studio Display. These are for more professionals and more creatives. So that makes me think, the likelihood of someone caring about upgradability or modularity is definitely higher than it would be in the smartphone market, because the smartphone market is basically the entire planet. Um, it's like billions of people with smartphones these days now. So outside of the tech audience, at least, I feel like outside of the tech audience, there's a lot less people buying external monitors and Macs as a whole. Um, I'm seeing Luke's tweet. He said Apple is shipping $5,000 machines with empty secondary SSD ports that do not function and primary SSD slots that will not boot from anything other than the original installed SSD. There is no justification for this. Mac Studio is not upgradable. I don't know who was going into the Mac Studio thinking it was upgradable. Are these the same people thinking the Mac Pro is going to be upgradable? Because I'm still under the belief that the 2019 Mac Pro was a troll. I have not been convinced otherwise. I know we've seen leaks and we've seen some people say, oh yeah, but the pros care about upgradability and that Apple's going to try to make this modular upgradable machine with the Mac Pro. And I'm like, guys, they literally made a $50,000 cheese grater with all of these options, right? Oh, you can swap out this, you can add this, and oh, it's engineered so brilliantly so you can easily take apart everything with minimal tools and upgrade this and this. They launched all of that 6 months before announcing the Apple Silicon transition. 6 months. They knew for a fact. Of course, things like the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra, all of that stuff has been years in development, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure Apple was developing something like the M1 Ultra at the exact same time they were launching the cheese grater Mac Pro. It was literally a bait and switch. The whole thought process was, well, we could launch this super expensive, overpriced, Intel crap with the 1.5 terabytes of RAM, charge $50,000 for it, and for a while it will be the fastest Mac on the market, right? Like we'll get everyone to buy this thing in the name of upgradability. Oh yes, we can upgrade it. Oh yes, it's modular. Oh, we can customize it to our liking so that it ages well. Despite all of that, behind the scenes, Apple was like, oh yeah, but we're gonna make a $5,000 Mac Studio that's better. And it's going to be a fraction of the price, and their ARM architecture was all ready to go. They were trolling. They essentially were like, we can get away with charging for this thing for a few months. Very few people will buy it, but we'll have very, very thick profit margins. Yeah, half of the 50 grand is the RAM, but Apple's profit margin on a $50,000 Mac is a lot better than that of a $5,000 Mac. Scott says, I was convinced the Mac Pro prices were a joke. It's a joke, but it's a serious one. It's a very profitable joke. They made a ton of money off of that thing, only to come out with Apple Silicon a couple years later and be like, oh yeah, by the way, you should not be wasting money on Intel Mac Pros anyway. Openly showing off how the M1 Ultra is faster than the 28-core option. Apple has not cared about upgradability for a long time. And I see the 2019 Mac Pro as like a last-minute effort for Apple to capitalize on people who wanted upgradability. And then it just makes me laugh how quickly afterwards they were like, oh yeah, by the way, that thing's whole pointless. So the main reason people like upgradability, right, is so that they can scale their... that way I don't have to buy a whole new computer and I can just upgrade individual components as I need to. It's like, oh yeah, that whole thing's useless now. That whole thing is slower than this new one. And is Apple going to provide that many modules or that many upgrade parts for the 2019 Mac Pro? I don't think so. They're going to just tell you, nah, buy the Mac Studio. Nah, buy the Mac Pro. It was just a total waste, in my opinion. I mean, it was a total troll. And if you take out the 2019 Mac Pro, then you can tell that over the past 10 years, Apple has not cared at all about making sure that you can upgrade and have modular options. Now, granted, I don't know why they put additional SSD slots on the Mac Studio. I don't know why those are there. But if they're not talking about it, it's probably because there's not a point for it right now. It would be very confusing if Apple put those in there, didn't talk about it, and then it turned out you could upgrade them and you could open it up and add more SSDs. It's like, what? Watched a video from Luke about a 2011 MacBook or something. It was interesting to see all the upgradability options. Right, that was over 10 years ago. That's why I said 10. You can get a Mac Pro with base memory and then get the 1.5 terabytes of RAM from Micron or Samsung. You could, but regardless, you're going to be spending $6,000 on a machine that comes with a quarter of a terabyte. It is useless not being able to change or upgrade SSD in the Mac Studio. I just don't know why people were going into this with that expectation. I knew from the beginning, like, yeah, they did not showcase how easy this. If they wanted you to tear it apart and upgrade it, they wouldn't have embedded the screws under the rubber. Um, I knew very clearly that that was not the point of the product. This product was not meant to be opened up and worked on. Can it be opened up and worked on? Sure, but that does not mean that was its intention. There's no additional slot. Both slots are populated on the 4/8 terabyte models. Oh, well, if that's the case, then why? Wait, why does he say there's no justification? There's the justification for you. They made the assumption that the other port does not merge and use the controller chips on the primary port. Ah, see, there was their mistake. If it does everything you need for the next 3 years, most people could not care at all. Yeah, I would definitely much rather just have a Mac with overhead than buy a Mac that's modular. You know what makes the Mac Studio a pro device, not the M1 Ultra? The SD card slot reader. I will admit, having a SD card slot on the Mac Studio but not on the Mac Pro, it's instantly more practical and functional. M1 Max outperforms your precious iMac. Oh wait, I don't like it because it doesn't have a dedicated GPU. Right. It doesn't matter if the GPU is better. If it's not upgradable, then it's bad. Right? If you want expandable storage, use an external drive. What's so wrong with that? It will act the same. Well, I would say like 8 terabytes of local storage is already like absurdly high. That's a lot of internal storage to have. If you need more than that, you will most likely want to go with a NAS or external RAID of some kind that you can tap into via the 10 gigabit Ethernet port. So I don't really know where this whole upgradable thing is supposed to slide. It's like 8 terabytes of local storage is a lot. That's, I think, enough for the average consumer. If you need more than that, then use your NAS, use your RAID. I guess it's mostly people just wanting to bypass the expensive SSD upgrades on Apple's site, but of course Apple wants you to buy their stuff. The drives are software locked to the machine as well. That's what I figured. It probably helps with security as well. If they weren't locked to the machine, then they could be a lot more easy accessed if someone ripped it apart. Apple's version of modular is 6 Thunderbolt 4 ports, and that's fine with me. Yeah, I'll take it. If build your PCs if you care about modularity. Just don't get mad at a cow for not being a chicken. That's what I feel like people are doing when they get mad at the Mac Studio for not being upgradable or modular. It's like, that's not what it is. That's not its point. There would probably be a handle or some screws on the outside if they wanted you to upgrade it yourself. How's T-Mobile internet? I've actually been considering it. Has it been as seamless as fiber? Well, I've never owned fiber, but no. Fiber will always be better if that's an option where you are. But it's been okay. I would say, well, I'll save most of it for the review, but why can't the cow lay eggs? Pretty much. Asking the Mac to be modular and upgradable. That's complaining why the cow can't lay eggs. It's like some people want a small, compact, ironed out, simplified version of a computer that doesn't take up a lot of space but has a lot of power and has good I/O. It's their choice to make a computer that's not user upgradable but still very powerful. And there's a decent market for that. There's a lot of people willing to pay for that. That's why laptops sell so well. Laptops have a lot less modularity and upgradability, but they outsell desktops by quite a large margin. The Mac Studio is an amazing piece of technology. Me in 2025, I use the Studio as a Plex server. Yeah, that'll probably happen. Yeah, I'll do a video on the T-Mobile home internet thing, but I would say for my use case, it is great. For someone like me, who does a lot of uploading, it's wonderful. If you care about download speed, probably not the best option. If you care about affordability, it might be the cheapest internet option if it's available in your area. So that's another huge selling point. As far as I can tell, T-Mobile home internet has been the cheapest internet I've ever had in my life. Like, as far as home Wi-Fi goes. As far as like I gotta pay for a Wi-Fi network that powers the whole house and everything, and can handle all of my security cameras and all of our phones and our TVs and everything. There are some compromises, but I can't think of another internet provider we've had in the past that's been this cheap before. So I give it credit for that. That'll be one impressive Plex server, that's for sure. It's so weird though that the Mac Studio is upgradable, but they limit it with software. Well, it's upgradable, but for Apple's own SSDs, as someone brought up in the chat. Those SSD slots are occupied when you opt for the 4 and 8 terabyte version. So the slots are there for a purpose, but it's meant to be upgradable by Apple. It's not meant to be upgradable by the end user, which makes sense. Are you using T-Mobile right now? Yes, I have no other internet right now. This is literally the only internet to the house. This is all over T-Mobile. And for the most part, it's handling everything fine. There's a few caveats with that, but it's a long story, so I'll dive into it in the review. I have 4 Thunderbolt, and one of those goes to a 3-port Thunderbolt hub, and I use all of them. Infinite Thunderbolts? I think that's possible. Can they jack your price up a year if they want to? I think any internet provider can. I don't know of any internet provider that is like, we will never change our price for 100 years. It'll be the exact same. I've never heard of that. Comcast will do a couple-year contracts. Like Comcast sent us more ads in the mail the other day. They were like, we'll lock you in for this price for 2 years. And then after the 2 years, it goes way up. I have never heard of an internet service that guarantees the price will never change. But yeah. For now, T-Mobile is the cheapest internet I've ever seen for where I am. I know that there's cheaper internet elsewhere, but I don't live there. It's $50 a month, but it's a flat exact 50. It's not like 50 and then sales tax or something. It's like exactly 50.00. And because I have the Apple Card, I get 3% cash back on that. As long as you have auto pay turned on with T-Mobile, it's $50 a month. If you do it month to month, I think it's $55. But yeah, I get 3% back on that round 50. So it's actually $48.50 a month, which I've never had internet that cheap. Even the cheapest possible Comcast plan was $55 a month, and the upload was crap with that plan. I think it was like 10 megabits up on that tier, and it was like $55 before taxes and fees. Comcast would always list a certain price, and then by the time you got the bill, they would add in all these other things. So for us, they were like, hey, if you want decent upload speeds, which was like 40 for them. There's like, if you want 40 megabits up, it's only 110 a month. And then after all the service fees and stuff, it ends up being like 120, 130. And then if you want unlimited data, that's another 30. T-Mobile is unlimited data. But there's some throttling going on. I hate how every single Thunderbolt dock has a gazillion inferior ports and maybe 1 or 2 Type-C ports. Yeah, well, that's usually why people buy them. Like I said, they consider PCIe to be plug crap in everyone. That's seriously Apple stance. Plug crap in everyone. Right. Yeah, it's kind of cool when you forget CenterStage is being used and the camera just moves around. I like that too. I know if there's fiber in your area or if you live overseas, you're going to have super duper cheap internet. I know that's not what people are asking about it for. Everyone's like, well, I get this here. It's like, great. I'm so happy for you. It's like the equivalent of telling a homeless person to buy a house, Why don't you just buy a house if you're homeless, It's like, it's not that simple. We can't all move to England. I have the T-Mobile One plan. The price has not gone up in 8 years. Well, I hope it stays that way. I'm just saying there's nothing in the contract that says they can't change the price. Is the Mac Studio with M1 Max overkill for 4K video editing? Not necessarily. It just depends on how much time are you trying to save. Yeah, I like Mint Mobile. It's worked well for us. If you're exporting lots of videos and you need them to be exported quickly, then no, I would not say the M1 Max is overkill because that's what I use. But I edit 2, sometimes 3 videos that are 4K 60 FPS a day. So I'm frequently editing a lot of stuff. Having something that exports efficiently is helpful. If you edit 4K content but you're only planning on posting 1 video a week, M1 Max probably don't need that amount of speed. You can edit. I remember editing all of my videos off of the M1 chip back when I reviewed the MacBook Air. I had the M1, just the regular M1. It was not M1 Pro or M1 Max or anything, and it was fine. Playback was great. I could play back 8K content and it was fine. It's just going to be slower at the export process. So if you're not in a huge hurry to export, then there's still nothing wrong with the M1 chip. It's still plenty fast, I think, for the vast majority of people. So it all depends on your workflow, I guess, if it's overkill or not. We have homeless people too. All our houses are full. Just buy a new one. Just build a new house. What's the big deal? I wonder if the Magenta Max is worth it for T-Mobile phone because they provide good value for trade-in. I don't know much about that, so I'm sorry I can't comment on it. But I've got more videos to make. You guys talking about internet. Now we should probably work on my review. I've been using the stuff for a while. They don't have Verizon 5G home internet in my area. I checked, which I was kind of grateful for because I hate Verizon with a passion. That's who I was on before Mint Mobile, and just so much of their business frustrates me. On a personal note, I really, really hate Verizon. And I was going to be really annoyed if the best Wi-Fi option in my area was to use Verizon. But thankfully, they weren't available where I am. And T-Mobile's worked out pretty good so far. So what's the export time for a 4K at 60 video, like 2x real time? It depends on the codec you're using, so it's going to vary a lot. But for me, it's not quite 2x real time, but it's faster than 1x. So like, for example, the last tech video I uploaded was the Mac Ultra unboxing where I unboxed everything and set it up. That was a little over 14 minutes, I think, and it was 4K at 60. And I used the M1 Ultra on that, but it exported at the same speed as the M1 Max. That was a 14-minute video. It exported in 9 minutes. So I don't know the exact ratio of that. Maybe 1.2, 1.3. So a little bit faster than it would take to watch the video to export the video. But that's when you're doing ProRes. If you're doing ProRAW, it might be less. I've had weird situations where it's like if you export a video at RAW, it can actually write it faster because it's not doing this complicated compression technique. But I'm specifically exporting my videos for Apple devices because I'm trying to prioritize bandwidth and I'm not trying to make my file sizes too large. But the one time I did a RAW export, I think it was for Tailosive TV, it exported in I exported like a 9-minute video in 3 minutes or something like that. It's very fast because it's just creating a bunch of data. It's not compressing anything. Everyone I know who has Verizon uses them out of necessity, not choice. Yep, exactly. I've heard horrible stories from Verizon, and everyone's just like, well, I have to use them. I stopped using Verizon years ago. I didn't like charges that kept appearing in my bill, and then bad customer service to handle. Oh no, so expensive, terrible customer service, terrible account management. By the way, that's one thing that Mint Mobile does not get enough credit for. Oh, okay, sure, Mint Mobile's cheap and they do prepaid plans, so you get really affordable rates. But another thing I want to give Mint Mobile massive props for is the simplicity of their account. Like you just have an email and a password for one person. You don't have to have like 4 people attached to one plan. Verizon freaks out if you just want to have one line. They're like, what? No, you got to get all these plans together. You got to rope them in. And then you have an account manager. And then you have subjects on the account. And then you have a billing pin. And you got a password for each line. And then you got to remember all these separate passcodes and stuff. And that is something frustrating me about the whole T-Mobile home internet thing is they require multiple apps. You have to have one app for the home internet and one app for billing. And, for some reason, a lot of the home internet data is in the billing app. So you have these 2 apps, whereas Starlink was just one app. Legacy carriers have these issues with like, okay, what's your billing pin? And you got to have all this extra layers of security Verizon required more passwords than my bank account. My bank account has one password. Verizon required like 3 different codes, and you had to have different access depending on if you were the owner of the account or you were a user on the account, and who was a authorized person to make changes. Oh, it was so confusing. We have a grandfathered Sprint plan that rivals the cost of Mint, and now with the merger, we're on T-Mobile. Got lucky, I guess. Well, that's good. It's about the same price of Mint, I suppose. My parents are considering going for Verizon. I'm doing everything in my power to tell them no. I haven't heard great stories so far. Customer service accounts for a lot that goes beyond pricing. Oof. Still liking your MacBook Pro. Which model did you end up with? Just got mine, 14-inch Pro, loving it. Thanks, Steven. Yeah, I got the 16-inch, 8 terabytes M1 Max with 32 gigs of RAM. I've never run out of RAM yet, so I didn't max out the RAM, but I do use a ton of storage, so I was planning on that one. When I go to my own carrier, I'm definitely considering something like Mint. It just sounds more simple and everything. I've loved it, especially after dealing with Verizon. It was just so much more simple to manage your account. How much data have I used? What's my wallet at? How much, what card do I have on file? When's my next bill? What is that bill going to be? Yeah, exactly like what Mike said. To access your PIN, tell us your mother's aunt's maiden name. They put in all of these security questions. It's so confusing. The reason those companies make it so confusing is because they want to make it hard for you to switch out. It's like their goal with account management is to make it so confusing that you don't think about it when your bill goes up, which did happen to us. Over and over again, the rates would increase or the bill would get higher, and the whole process of trying to get your bill lower again was so frustrating people would just give up. Ugh. What's your first pet's mother's first car? That's good. Oh, they're annoying. Anyway, I gotta get going. I got some more work to do, but I appreciate you all for tuning in and joining me on this CenterStage demo. Oh, wait, one more thing. I gotta end this poll. So we got 250 votes, CenterStage won, which is kind of surprising, considering it's a bit more compressed than the MacBook webcam. So glad everyone likes CenterStage. One more poll. I'm gonna find this out at the end of the stream because I'm not sure if I can change it mid-stream. But I'm talking to you guys on the... Oh, Option Command Media. Thank you for the super chat. He said, hi, Drew, Matt here. Appreciate the super chat. What mic sounds better? So, I'm on the Studio Display microphone right now. And I'm going to switch it to the MacBook and see if it works. Okay, I think I just switched it over. So I'm at the same distance. I'm sitting where I was, except now I'm talking to you through the MacBook Pro microphone instead of the Studio Display microphone, which luckily I can actually do CenterStage thanks to OBS settings. I can do CenterStage but use my MacBook's microphone. So if the MacBook microphone sounds better, I think I'll just leave that on. But they're very similar microphones. They're just placed in different places. The Studio Display mic is way up high and the MacBook is kind of down low, and I'm not really sure which one would capture better audio. Do you use skincare products? No, I don't. Probably should. Voice travels down. People are saying the Mac mic sounds better. Okay, MacBook is at 61%. Ooh. So there's a decent number of people saying the Studio Display sounds better. Never mind. 69% voted MacBook. That's great. MacBook sounds less echoey. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, maybe it probably would capture more echo from that height, which is good because I'm not getting rid of the MacBook. I'm not getting rid of the MacBook regardless. Okay. Most of the chat is saying Mac mic. Now it's over 70%. Some people saying Studio Display. Probably because it's closer and the table is absorbing the sound waves of your voice. MacBook is louder and easier to hear. Also, EQ is more balanced. Okay, that's good. MacBook mics sound better, but the display mic still sounds solid. All right. Walk away to test CenterStage with the Max mic. Well, I'm guessing it does nothing, but if I walk back here, this is how I sound off of my MacBook Pro microphone. Not sure what it's like. Maybe the Studio Display can capture audio from further away, but Katrina says the studio mic is way better. That's interesting. Why? Austin says they both sound about the same. Desk tour anytime soon. It's kind of a mess right now. It's and it's got a lot of temporary hardware on it, so deeper bass in the MacBook mic. I like deeper bass. I want to know why studio sounds if you're in the same room. Okay. Well, I'd rather have more bass, I think. I have a feeling the MacBook mic is better. It's much more clear, which makes sense. I am physically closer to the MacBook mic, so that's logical. But hey, I'll probably be live for the channel members shortly. So I'm gonna end this live stream, but members can watch me make the next tech video. So I'll catch you guys over there. Oh, Studio captures treble better. Interesting. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for the super chats, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care. Bye.